The SPY now turns to the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, fellows. Well, the big news coming out of the Biden campaign yesterday was the historical choice of Kamala Harris as the party's nominee for vice president. For the record, I'd like to add that our own Craig Fuller had predicted this many months ago when the selection process was just beginning. So I'd like to turn to you, Craig, for your reaction and also how you think the Trump campaign will respond. For example, do you think they might drop Mike Pence from the ticket?
Well, I probably have more clarity with regard to the Democratic Party than the Trump campaign. But first of all, let me say sometimes you get lucky, but I think that Kamala Harris is a very strong pick for Biden. I think I said last week, and I think this week it showed it. The process was a very well-run process. I think it was wise to look at multiple choices, although I suspect that Vice President Biden had Kamala Harris in his sights fairly early on in this. The one thing you cannot do in the presidential contest is put somebody up there who's not been tested by fire. There were other strong people, but none as experienced at running not only in a national campaign, but in the state of California, which is almost like a national campaign. And thus, Kamala Harris is vetted in so many different ways. I also think they were smart to let the suspense build, put the story out earlier in the week, let 24 hours go by before they actually sat down together. They came together knowing pretty much what the press wanted to ask, although my viewing since she was announced is it's all been pretty positive. She is one tough campaigner. She's very articulate. It's nice that Vice President Pence is anxious for a debate, but I'm not sure that's the way he's going to feel when it's over. As for Trump's reaction, I guess it's probably predictable that it was immediate and a bit savage. I don't think that serves him well with the block of voters that she appeals to that he most needs, and that's the voter in the middle. I think taking on an individual who has strong qualifications in such a trivial manner does not serve him well. He's not going to lose his supporters, and he's certainly not going to win over those who are solidly in the Biden camp. But those voters in the middle are who really count now till November 3rd, and I don't think he helped himself there. As for Pence, it's very difficult for a president seemingly to change horses, change vice presidents in midstream. It just doesn't seem to happen, even when there can be arguments made for it. Well, on the one hand, nothing would surprise me or us perhaps, but I suspect that Vice President Pence is going to be dueling with Kamala Harris through the course of this campaign.
Al, what are your thoughts?
First, let me congratulate Craig. I really didn't realize he was such an insider in the Biden campaign. Look, the president responds to this like he responds to everything else. He rants, he flails, he lies, and he'll try to make Kamala Harris and Joe Biden into some sort of ogres. He's already made his argument that she's a nasty woman because she plays campaign politics, and that she's a radical lefty. But it's not going to work. People have got far too much to worry about today to be concerned with his latest tantrum. The other problem for Trump is no matter how hard he tries to change the narrative, this election's a referendum on his performance, and particularly on how he's performed on the three biggest challenges of his presidency, which are the coronavirus pandemic, racial unrest across the country, and the economic depression that's been caused by shutting down for the virus. And I think people have basically already made a decision that he can't handle it, that he's failed in, picking a different vice presidential candidate, dumping Pence or attacking Biden or Harris or whoever he wants to attack, isn't going to stop the virus. It's not going to make the economy better, and it's not going to calm the country. And that's what he has to do, and I really think he's incapable of doing that. Since the beginning of the campaign, Biden has sort of said this campaign is about the soul of America. It's a fight for the soul of America. And in a way that his picking of Kamala Harris and President Trump's criticism makes that point. Kamala Harris was pretty tough on Joe Biden in the early primary debates, but what he's shown is he's bigger than that. He thinks she's a person who could take over if something happened to him, and so he's made her his vice presidential nominee. He responded by becoming bigger when Trump always responds by becoming petty and smaller. And the second thing is this pick, and I give Craig credit for a lot of my thinking on this. It really does talk to the future of America. America's going to be a more diverse, very different country in the years ahead. And Kamala Harris represents that. She's a daughter of immigrants of Indian and African-American descent. And at the same time, Trump wants to go backwards. He wants to recreate the 1950s. He wants to defend Confederate moderates or monuments, and he wants to incite turmoil. So this really makes the decision more stark, and I don't think it's going to cut for Trump.
Dave, one thing I'd like to add, I think that one of the things that Kamala Harris provides right from the start now is energy. You just sense that the Biden campaign has picked up a lot of energy as a result of this. And I think, contrary to some, advisors who might say, send them out on the road separately, I like the idea, and I've heard this discussed, of them appearing together more. I think when America sees them as a team, that Biden will look even stronger. And I know from my experience, I'm sure from Al's, that somehow when these individuals who are seeking the presidency actually make a big decision, and choosing your vice president is a big decision. They make that big decision, and they are bigger as a result of it, and they're more positive as a result of it. And that's something that Mike Pence cannot bring to his ticket, but I do believe Kamala Harris is going to bring to the Biden-Harris ticket.
To me, the best example of that was the one when we fought with Craig and his team in 1992, the picking of Al Gore. It was unconventional because he was from a neighboring state. He was much like President Clinton or Bill Clinton, Governor Clinton at that time. But we wanted to reinforce the message of what we were about. Because we thought if we didn't convince people that the whole Democratic Party was changing, we're going to get beat again. And that pick tended to reinforce. And again, I think Harris's pick reinforces the main themes of the Biden campaign.
Speaking of predictions, both of you suggested a few weeks ago that regardless of how messy the sausage making was going to be in passing another COVID assistance bill, you both felt that the political pressure was too great not to have a compromise made. That hasn't happened, and President Trump has made a statement that he will be using executive orders to provide more temporary aid for the unemployed. Is this how it's supposed to work? Let's start with Al.
Well, first of all, I think we will still get a package, because really the political interests of both parties are in getting a deal. Congress has its way of doing business, and it's usually to dilly-dally around until they have no other choice but to act. And Trump doesn't help. From what I can tell, reading about the negotiations, his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, doesn't really want a deal, and Mnuchin wants to make one, and they're all over the lot. But these so-called executive actions, to me, are dubious at best. The last time I looked at the Constitution, it said Congress had the power of the purse. And in the days when Craig and I were active in politics, senators of both parties would have been screaming and yelling about the president stomping all over a congressional prerogative. Now, that hadn't happened, even though Ben Sasse on the Republican side has been pretty clear about his point on that. But the real problem for the Trump thing, it's not real. It's a good press release. He's going to dominate the news. But in the end, it's really questionable whether people are going to get anything from it. And that's what really matters, because that's his problem. He can't fool anybody anymore by what he says in the briefings or sort of executive orders. I mean, for example, it was supposed to stop evictions, and as I understand it, it instructed agencies to come up with ideas for maybe stopping evictions. I mean, it's probably not going to happen. But what's going to happen is that Congress I think they've sort of gone home, and they're going to start hearing from people in their districts and states. And if they don't have a sense of urgency as they go out, they'll have a sense of urgency when they come back, because people are hurting. And when they come back, which may be sooner than they'd expect, we'll get a deal.
Oh, I think we'll get a deal. I don't think we'll be proven wrong. Ultimately, I think it's a matter of time. I was listening the other night to Peter Baker and Susan Glazer, who'd written a book about Jim Baker, former chief of staff, former Treasury Secretary, former Secretary of State, campaign manager, friend of George Herbert Walker Bush. And they made a great point. They said if he was in that White House as chief of staff, he'd be saying to the president, look, do your job, get this deal done. You know, if you get the deal done, you can get elected or reelected president, but you can't get reelected president playing this kind of a game with thousands, millions, literally millions of lives. And I think that they do have to hunker down and get a deal done. I honestly think one of the problems is they just don't have much practice at this. I got a new chief of staff. You have a Treasury Secretary who, you know, likes to go to the Hill, but getting these deals done, this is not something they've got a lot of experience doing, and it's showing. But ultimately, I think Congress will decide they need something done before they go face their electorate in September and October.
Finally, we continue to get questions from spy readers, and this one has to do with the perceived power Wall Street executives have on American politics. Are firms like Goldman Sachs too powerful in influencing economic policy and decision-making? Craig?
You know, I think we've all heard these discussions about who has influence and whether it's too much or too little. The truth is that a president appoints over 2,000 people to various offices, 18 cabinet departments and agencies, last time I counted. There have been people from Goldman Sachs playing very important roles in governments. There's also been people from the Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club, and a number of other organizations with a different perspective. And I think one of the things voters have to realize when they go to the ballot, when they cast their ballot, is you know, who is aligned with which candidate. And you have to expect that the winner is going to bring people into government that he or she has trust and confidence in and believes in their skills. You've got to be careful to avoid real conflict of interest, and sometimes that's overlooked. But I don't worry, other than that, getting people who are experienced, who have world experience and relationships across the globe for some of these very tough jobs is a good thing. And I generally think it works out with people coming from a lot of different sectors ultimately over time.
Al, too much power in Wall Street?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I basically agree with what Craig said about, you know, a lot of people in Wall Street have real expertise that help with growing the economy. Look, there is too much money in politics, and candidates have to spend too much time raising money. But the problem is a lot broader than Goldman Sachs, as Craig alluded. You know, in full disclosure, I had to raise millions of dollars a year when I was head of the Democratic Leadership Council. and a significant part of that money came from Wall Street, including from a host of individuals. But I point out individuals acting on their own, usually through their own private foundations or private circles from Goldman Sachs. So I know that crowd pretty well. I even had to raise money from my friend Craig when he was in the private sector. So, you know, and personally, I always hated it. It was the worst part of my job. But there's no question that particularly in the last 3 decades, I think the amount of money in politics has really increased exponentially, but it comes from all sorts of places, including Wall Street firms like Goldman Sachs, but it also comes from hedge fund operators. They're probably the biggest source of new money. They're extraordinarily rich, and they contribute often, they would say altruistically, but it's, you know, corporate PACs and corporate foundations and trade associations and labor unions, and not to speak of millions of people who basically fund causes and fund politics with a few bucks online. You know, I'd like to say that never had any influence on policy. And in my book, I wrote about all the great firewalls I created at the DLC to separate donors and policy. But, you know, it's human nature. And if you get a lot of money from a source, you're probably going to listen to what they have to say. Now, so the question is what you do about it. And, you know, we need a better way. I've always been very nervous about public financing because I don't like the government deciding which campaigns can be funded. But I'm starting to move more into that camp. But we do need reform.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.